We now have two different peace plans in front of us. One that was put together by the United States and one that is put together by Europe. On both sides, there are things that are the same and there are things that are both completely different on how things should be done. Even though they may be written the same, it's like one of them is just like, hey, do this. Other one gives more detail about it. And so I figured the best thing to do is sit down, talk about the similarities, but most importantly, break down the differences. So before we get started, do make sure you are subscribed and you turn on notifications. This video might run a little bit longer than my other ones since there is a lot of details to put into this. But understand, I've looked at this now for the past 2 hours and broke it down in the most simplest way as possible that at least I can do. And ultimately, I would say that both plans are broken down into 5 different parts. You've got the majority of it being about a ceasefire, then security guarantees for Ukraine, territorial control, who is going to be able to have what after everything is done, then Ukraine being able to enter some kind of agreements with the European Union, though it doesn't mention NATO whatsoever in this, and then we have the economic reconstruction of Ukraine. And so when it comes to similarities, okay, I have to say that these two proposals, by the way, are both just like frameworks, and they're both one page. Okay, we actually read both versions of it that was actually provided via Reuters. So in the ceasefires, both of them call for a permanent ceasefire and immediate negotiations for the technical beginnings, meaning like ceasefire today, and as soon as that happens, the teams have to come together and start discussing how are we going to do this? Because it's going to take a little while to roll things back. It could take several weeks. And so discussions need to take place, whether it's, hey, we're both going to remove at the same day backwards from here, and there we go. These are things, once again, a framework. Both plans do involve a third party monitoring the ceasefire, something that Russia already said no to from the get-go. From the U.S. side, and we know Russia hasn't responded to this one yet, but they already said no to this. Essentially, the way that this would be done is that the United States would back it, but European troops would be inside Ukraine. Now, does not mean they'll be on the front lines. It just means that they would be in Ukraine, whether it's training Ukrainians or potentially getting it to where they're just off the front lines. That way, it's a security guarantee. Then when it comes to security guarantees, both plans do involve a robust security guarantee. At least it says robust. Though there really hasn't been much detail about what exactly that would mean on the U.S. side of it. You know, we know on the Ukrainian side, it actually states in here that it would be taken from Russia. Russia would have to pay Ukraine to rebuild, and the leverage there would be that $300+ billion that are currently frozen. Then when it comes to a guarantor of things, it's a combination of European countries having to help with the security guarantees, implementing it, being there, and other countries who are not European that want to step up to help Ukraine. And there are other countries that do want to step up. Actually, Zelensky was just in Africa 2 days ago, and we know they've worked together on a cooperation. We know Japan wants to help. There's other countries that want to help, and so that gives us to this. When it comes to territorial control, both plans do recognize that Ukraine will get back the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the Kakhovka Dam. The difference would be is that it would probably be under some kind of partnership with the United States. A little bit of breakdown, a little bit down the way. And then, of course, both of it, when it comes to the Dnieper River, they would both plans say they would get access to it. When it goes to Ukraine joining the EU, both plans says Ukraine can join. Ukraine's been working on this since 2000 and I want to say 15, 16. And they've been doing a lot pre-war, before 2022, rebuilding roads, getting things up to the EU standard. Believe you me, I've seen the changes from the first time I went in 2012? No, 2015, whatever it was, up until now. Big difference because they've been trying to get on the same level. Now it comes to the economic reconstruction. Both plans do state that there are economic cooperation between the United States and Ukraine. That is the mineral rights deal in which the United States would, of course, come in. They would help Ukraine get these projects back up and running, a lot of which have been stalled because of the war. And then there would be some kind of fund put in place in which Ukraine could rebuild. Both do suggest the potential removing and easing sanctions on Russia. They're just done in a little bit different kind of pace. Those are the similarities. I know I mentioned some differences, but really let's kind of break down, there's more in the differences. So when it comes to the plans, the European plan calls for an unconditional ceasefire from Russia across everything, land, air, and sea, where the U.S. plan focuses more on a permanent ceasefire without specifying any kind of inclusion in all domains. So it's kind of just like one saying, we'll have a ceasefire now immediately. The U.S. one just says there will be some kind of ceasefire. Not really that big of a difference, but the European plan does demand that Russia returns all of the children the moment a ceasefire happens. Any children that were taken illegally from Ukraine to Russia and civilians will be returned immediately on the ceasefire. Immediately. On top of that, they would then work out plans so that would have a prisoner exchange. And that would be a full exchange. Ukrainian soldiers for Russian soldiers, go, done. That way everyone is home where they need to be. Because believe you me, Ukraine, they don't want to care for the Russians as much as they do, though they're taking really good care of the Russians versus how Russia takes care of Ukrainians. So that being said, that's not mentioned in the U.S. plan. But I feel like that is something that actually is common sense, right? That should be in there to begin with. Next, we get into security guarantees. Very different here. The U.S. plan states security guarantees for Ukraine, but does not go into any detail whatsoever. Now, I know a lot of this has to do with the fact that the United States doesn't want Ukraine to be a part of NATO, and it does say that in there. But interestingly enough, the Ukrainian one doesn't state NATO either. It doesn't say that Ukraine would want to join NATO, even though we know they want to. It does say about the EU, but when it comes to NATO, it says on the Ukrainian side that, or the European side, that there would be some kind of Article 5 sort of security guarantee type, where they're not a part of NATO, but since European troops would be inside of Ukraine, if Russia were to, hit a building with international troops, and yeah, there needs to be a response. Russia clearly broke a ceasefire and then attacked international troops, then yes, there needs to be some kind of Article 5-like response. Now, that doesn't mean every country's coming in full force. It just means that there would be some kind of response to said attack. And like with Article 5, there's a lot of rules and regulations on how things will work out. So that being said, countries would be able to, on their own, also come in and do something. Something the United States doesn't really say like this. On top of that, it says there'd be no restrictions on the Ukrainian defense forces, where they can continue to build up all of their military, and that they will be able to have trainings from other countries come in. Now, there is no consensus in the European plan on Ukraine's NATO membership. I think that's kind of left open on purpose. I think eventually down the line, whether it be 10 years, Ukraine will be joining NATO, especially if Russia continues to be a threat in Europe. But for right now, it doesn't really say that Ukraine will be entering NATO. Nothing about NATO in either side, except for the United States fully saying no NATO. And this one just says vaguely that there would be some kind of Article 5 sort of discussion taking place. Next, it comes into territory. You see, in the U.S. plan, they will recognize Crimea as Russian. Even though Russia, they went in and invaded in 2014, they kind of took out everyone who didn't agree with them. Those people who didn't agree with them who weren't taken out, left the country, and then Russia busted people, and then they held a vote. Prior to all this, the Tatars are the one people. Those are the people who actually live in Crimea. They want nothing to do with Russia. They were kind of independent. They decided to stick with the Ukrainians, not the Russians. So realistically speaking, the people there want to be Ukrainian, or want to be with the Ukrainians, not with the Russians. On top of that, the other territories, while the United States would say that Crimea is Russian, they would not recognize the other 4 territories, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. They would say that Russia has control of it. They wouldn't call it Russian land, which is kind of weird. At the same time, the U.S. says that Ukraine would get some territory back in Kharkiv. Not really sure how that works out. The European land does not recognize Crimea as a part of Russia. And it says here that we're not going to talk about territory at all. Not until a full and complete ceasefire is done. Because why would we reward Russia for a ceasefire with no proof that they're actually going to move forward with it, versus let's have a ceasefire, and if there's long and lasting peace, then we could discuss what's going to happen to these territories, which makes a lot more sense. Then we still have the negotiation based on the line of control and the time of the ceasefire. That's something that's still kind of up in the air. We don't really quite know how they would do that. Both sides actually don't really explain. Once again, it's a framework. Then it comes to economic compensation for Ukraine. The U.S. plan, there is no mention of the Russian sovereign assets being frozen or used for compensation. The European plan goes into detail explaining that provisions for using the Russian frozen assets. Essentially, we're going to keep that frozen. That is going to be frozen there. We're going to use that as a bargaining chip. Sort of as Russia, you're going to pay us back money for what you've done here so that we can rebuild our country. And when that number, which is not specified here, is met, when that number is met, we will release those funds to you. So they would get that money back, but it's after they already helped rebuild Ukraine. So how many years, timeline, we don't know. This is a framework. So I'll be honest with you, I'm pretty sure Russia would say no to that one too. But, once again, there is a difference here. Then it comes on sanctions. Both plans do say that they can release the sanctions. The U.S. plan says that sanctions were removed as a ceasefire, meaning they sign it today, ceasefire, all the sanctions are off, we're good to go. And those sanctions are going all the way back to 2014, the same ones that Obama put in place. All those sanctions gone. Now, interestingly enough, that's only for the United States. Europe still has sanctions and will continue to have sanctions on Russia, unless the United States would have a clause in here that states that Europe would actually have to release them at the same time. Once again, framework doesn't explain. While the European plan says, look, we get it. Sanctions will eventually have to come off. They will. But we need something in place to reward Russia over time for continuing to do their ceasefire. Because if you give everything to Russia now, they could just start their fight again in 2 or 3 years and it doesn't really matter. We need to put certain goals in place. Sort of like the prisoner swap between Israel and Hamas. That swap that, had goals and dates and things. That needs to be done here to where it's not like a quick snapback of like, boom, done. It needs to be a, hey guys, we made it another 6 months without any fighting. We're going to release sanctions on this bank and this bank. That way, Russia would still be held to stick to the contract and Ukraine would release those sanctions. So it's a win-win right there. Russia gets something, Ukraine gets something. Continued peace, sanctions get lifted over time. Doesn't explain in detail what that would be, but it would be enough so that people would understand that like these are the benchmarks here. As long as X, Y, and Z happens, we're good to go. So, a summary. Both plans, they both talk about a permanent ceasefire, security guarantees for Ukraine, and economic relief or recovery. The key differences lie in territory disputes. Really, that's what it comes down to, where the United States wants Crimea to be a part of Russia right away, and other territories be figured out. And will recognize as Russia, but not really Russian, while Ukrainian is, let's do a ceasefire, a full ceasefire, and then we'll talk about territory later, which I think is more reasonable. Then we saw about everything about handling Russian accents. Oh my gosh. Then we have the whole thing with Russian assets and how that would be distributed and or, how Ukraine would be rebuilt with that money or security guarantees and things like that. Sanctions, very different. Once again, United States all at once, Europe a little bit at a time. But that's the nitty gritty of everything. There are some really good points. Ultimately, Russia's already said no to both of these, so these already failed. But the Ukrainian one logically makes more sense. There are pluses and minuses for everyone here. You might say, well, under the United States plan, they're giving Russia those sanctions off and territorial control. I think that's too extreme. I definitely think, in my honest opinion, don't get angry with me on this. I think that Ukraine should get 4 territories back instantly on a ceasefire. And then Crimea needs to be discussed at a later date. At a later date. That is so complicated, unfortunately, because Russia's been there since 2014. They've built in so much infrastructure. They've built in so much. They bust in so many Russians. I think Ukraine will get it back one day. I just think it's going to take a very long time for it to happen. I think that Russia should pay for everything they've done to Ukraine. And there's enough punishment in here, at least from what I feel. There's enough punishment in here for Russia to feel the pain down the line so that they don't do this again. Not just in Ukraine, but anyone in Europe. I don't think that these negotiations are unfair, at least from the Ukrainian one, or the European one. But Russia's going to say no to anything because they not only want, and they said this even yesterday, they not only want the territories they have, but the other half of those territories. So it almost seems like there's no scenario in which Russia will be happy for unless they get everything they wanted 4 years or 3 years ago. And so I think this is where the United States then needs to put a foot down and say, look, we got 2 here. Maybe we do a best of both worlds. Russia will say no to all of them. Then we got to put more pressure on the Russia. What is that pressure? What does it look like? Well, you could do more sanctions on them. There's always more room to do more sanctions. Sanction the ships or the ports that these things are going to. You could also, and I know tariffs sound really weird, you could put tariffs on Russia once things are done. Like if you want to release a sanction, sure, but now put heavy tariffs on them. That money then could rebuild Ukraine. An option that's not even mentioned in here, but it is something that is a possible. There are things to do here, and that will punish Russia and will make them understand what they did was wrong. Because we can't reward Russia for what they've done, because then they won't feel the sense of like, hey, we did something wrong here. We shouldn't do that again. But let me know your thoughts about all of this in the comment section below. It is a very complicated matter. And I know a lot of people in the comment section will either rip me for what I'm saying here, but it's just, I have family in Ukraine. I've been to Ukraine, pre-war, during war. I've seen the horrible things that Russians have done, not just in Ukraine, in other countries, Chechnya, Georgia. It's just, if Russia doesn't get put in their place now, they're going to do it again. Okay? You know, not to quote Trump here, but he said, you know, under Obama, they gave Crimea. Under Obama, we thought that, hey, if we told Russia, hold on this territory, they wouldn't invade any further. That didn't work. We saw this movie. Giving territory isn't something that's going to help. And by Trump saying, let's just give them the territory, you're just setting things up as a reward for Russia to just continue this war another day and potentially with another country. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe, turn on notifications. I might do a Substack. I'm still debating it, so I don't have that listed yet. But if I do, I'd greatly appreciate it if you do subscribe if you're watching this video down the line. But I want to thank you for joining me. Stay safe.